Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Cassie Mendez, and I'm a shamanic healer and owner of the Spirit Within. Both my work and my YouTube channel are about helping people through struggles in their life, through difficulties in their life. And today's topic, I want to talk about change. So, I want to talk about change because I feel like there's a lot of change going on in the world around us, but also in our lives. I've talked with a lot of people recently who just have a lot of changes going on, both externally in their life and internally within them. And I know change has been a really big theme in my own life over the last couple months. So, how do you feel about change? How when you hear change, what feelings come up for you? Do you ever feel like change is out of your control? When things change in your life, does it feel chaotic? Do you feel like life is happening to you and not for you? Does how does change make you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable with it? Do you get a sense of panic in your chest? Do you feel like this tightening knot in your stomach? When things change in life, do you feel sad? Is it really hard for you to get through that? Do you feel this grief kind of welling up inside of you? Or maybe you find yourself drawn to different activities to distract your mind from what's going on around you, from the change happening around you or in your life. Maybe drugs, sex, food, shopping, video games, TV, any of those things, social media. So the thing with change is it's always in our lives, right? No matter what, it's a constant. It's always present. We are not the same person today as we were even a week ago, or a month ago, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And ultimately, change brings about feelings of discomfort. And as humans, we tend to not like feeling uncomfortable, right? We really tend to shy away from it and avoid it and try to repair it. But change is always going to be present in our lives, right? It's not going anywhere. Who we are today is not who we were even yesterday or a week ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So if we can begin to build our understanding of change, then we can begin to sort of break down or break through this fear that we have of it and begin working with it like a partner on our healing path rather than something that needs to, just go away in our lives because it's not going to go anywhere, right? People tend to fear what they don't understand. And I really want to look at the role of change in our lives. What's its purpose here in our life? How is it helping us so that we can understand it better and sort of reduce that sense of fear around it that we may be feeling. So let's talk about the role of change in our lives. When I think about the role of change in our lives, I like to reflect on how I got where I am right now, right? Everything that I am in this moment is because of change. If I look at a video of me as a child, it's not the same person who's sitting here right now in this video, right? So everything, if everything was to stay the same in our lives, then we wouldn't grow, we wouldn't change, we would just be the same person. And how boring is that, right? Life is about connecting with our own energetic essence and, learning and feeling who we truly are and connecting with it at a deep level and then expressing that in our life, through our work, through our just everyday experience, through the connections that we have with our friends and family. The thing about change is that as we're going through these moments of change, they can dig up some of our old wounds or limiting beliefs or, traumas of the past, right? They sort of like poke at those wounds. But, exposing those weak points, it brings them forward to allow us to heal them, right? I think a lot of our lives we go through and these painful parts of us we sort of stuff down within us and we ignore them and we just like let them collect dust in hopes that if we, don't see them or don't interact with them, then they're not there. They're not going to affect our life. But they're affecting our life all the time. We just sometimes get in, this sort of autopilot as we're living, and we don't see them until we're ready to see them. And sometimes the universe comes in and sort of, sets us on the course when we're ready to begin to heal and transform these bits. And change is one of those teachers, one of those facilitators for this. And then as we're going through change and overcoming it, right, and getting to the other side of it, then it can really show us our strengths. It can really show us our gifts, and it can really just bring us more into alignment with who we truly are and, how we express ourselves in the world. And ultimately, it can bring us to a place where we feel happier and we can enjoy our lives a lot more, right? Because there's not as much tension, both in our body and in our spirit, right? We're freer because of it. So I'd ask you to reflect a moment with how do you view change? How do you feel about change? Do you have positive feelings about change, or do you have negative feelings about change? Is it good or is it bad? I would argue that some people would say, well, let's say winning the lottery, right? We would maybe label that as a good change. It's going to bring us money and it's going to make our life easier and all that. And I have a fun story about that, which I'll share next. And then bad change, let's say we lose our job, and how is that even a good thing, right? Like we lost our source of income, we lost our stability. Like how am I going to pay the bills? That could be really, it can sort of destabilize us, right? Like that's not good. Now the story about the winning the lottery. So I used to work with somebody when I was a nurse, and her mom was she sold insurance, I believe. And she had this lady come in one time who had won the lottery. And this lady was just miserable. She was like, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. And her mom was confused. She's like, well, how so? Like, you have money to like pay everything. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. And she said that the terrible thing was that when she won the lottery, it was like everybody came out of the woodwork. Everybody was like wanting something from her. They were just, using her for her finances. And then she said that even people that she didn't know, but they knew she had won the lottery, they were hitting her, purposely trying to hit her with their car so that they could sue her. So it was this constant battle of like people just coming after her, and it was the worst experience she ever had. So, I guess it's funny because like some things that we might label as good are, from somebody else's perspective are not the case. So, how maybe some of our own labels that we put on things with change are not what we really think they are, right? Maybe that's not the truth of it. If we can begin to sort of cultivate this deeper relationship with change in our lives, it can help us, maybe see the possibility in the situation, the positivity in the situation, or the potential in the situation. It can be hard when we're in the moment because we don't always, we don't have the bird's eye view, right? We're not sitting there 10 years from that moment of change and looking at the whole timeline. So it's really, it's sort of like a trust fall in a way. And, if we can, relax into that a little bit and trust the path that we're on, then we can begin to move through change just a little bit easier, right? And the one thing I want to say about viewing change as good, or sort of our relationship with change as good, is what I should say, is that doesn't mean that we negate what we're feeling. We don't suddenly like, oh yeah, look, I lost my job. It doesn't work like that. We're still feeling the painful parts, right? We're still feeling sad, or we're still feeling scared, or whatever is coming up, the anxiety. It's still there. But we don't let it keep us frozen. We don't let it hold us in place. We don't sort of get lost in those feelings, right? We feel them, and then we move forward with intentional action. So that brings me next to our response to change. How do we respond in moments of change? So, when we're responding to change, many of us default to a state of reactivity, right? We have these, thoughts that we start to think, our mental response. We have these feelings that we start to feel that come up, and that's our emotional response, right? And this is our knee jerk response, right? This is our sort of subconscious patterns that rise up in the moment when we're under stress, when change is in our life. So, our mental response, this could be thoughts coming across like, why is this happening to me? Why do things never go my way? Why can't I just say no? Or, why don't good things happen in my life? Why don't they like me? Um, I can't do anything right. These are all things that can come through our mind, and they're going to be different for everybody, right? Because we all have a different experience. We all have different sort of limiting beliefs in our life, or past traumas that could be sort of, coloring our thoughts in certain ways. And then emotionally, what's coming up emotionally? Do we tend to have anger rise up? Do we feel fear? Do we have anxiety? Do we have any feelings of guilt or shame or disappointment, sadness? For me, I grew up in a household where emotions were not talked about, they weren't discussed, they really were not even encouraged to be felt or showcased in a lot of ways. And so I didn't really have a lot of language for emotions when I first started, my own healing path. And there's a book by Brene Brown, I think it's called Atlas of the Heart, and it's just a book on emotions. And she lists out, I think, over 50 different emotions, and really provides some nice detail about them, just to kind of get you started if that's something you struggle with, because I know it was a struggle for me at first. So I want to ask you, how many times in your life have you said to yourself, if I just get through this one thing, then life will be good. Life will be easy. I just need to make it through this one thing, and then all will be well in my life. I know I've said that many times, so it can't be true, right? Because change is always going to come back around. It's this cycle, and we can get stuck in this cycle of change occurs, and then we have a reaction to that change, and then we try to fix it, we try to avoid it, we try to shut it down, or change it, right? We try to change the change in some way, whatever your pattern is, right? I've done all three of those. And then we have a little bit of a reprieve, right? We have a little bit of calm in our life. But what happens? Change comes back around again. Remember, change is a constant in our life. No matter what, no matter who you are, it's always going to be there. So we get on the cycle again. Now, what I want to say about this is that reaction that we have, how do we utilize this reaction that's coming up? And, one way I think about this when change arises in our life, think of like if you're, when I was younger, we used to go to the pond to go search for like turtles and frogs and stuff like that. And the water was clear when you just kind of came over and looked at it. But once you started putting your feet in like the dirt at the bottom, it would stir it up. It would become cloudy, and things, that were kind of sitting at the bottom were rising to the surface. And to me, I see this is what change does for us, right? We have these past wounds or traumas or limiting beliefs or anything that we've sort of suppressed and stuffed away in our life, and change brings those to the surface. And our reaction in that moment, that's the sort of map or compass or guide that is here to help us on our healing path. So, do we use this reaction as our healing partner, or do we let the sediment settle back down and tuck it away again? Because when we get in that cycle that I just talked about with change, reactivity, and reprieve, that's letting the sediment settle back down. So maybe we want to do it a little bit differently. We want a different way, right? So that we can, heal in our life and we can change our life. We want to move from this reactive cycle, being stuck in this reactive cycle, because it's really not serving us, right? It's just not serving our highest good. And we want to start utilizing change as a partner on our healing path. Change activates reaction. Our reaction is the map or the guide for us, the compass pointing in the direction for our healing. Healing allows us to more deeply connect with our intuition, our true self, our inner light, our spirit within, right? Who we really are. And that's the point we want to get to in life, right? We want to feel completely and naturally ourselves. This is how we begin to connect with our true purpose in life and our true way of expressing our own unique spirit. So, how can we begin to work with this and partner with this so that we don't let the sediment continue to just settle, back at the bottom of the pond? How can we begin to clean up the water, clean up our life? And this is what I want to talk about next. These steps that I'm going to share have really worked for me in my own life. So, feel free to give them a try in yours and see if it makes a difference for you. And, the steps are, I call it AAA. AAA to the rescue, right? I always love acronyms. It helps me really remember things so that I don't, I can recall them more easily, and it makes them just a little bit more useful in my own life. So the first one is awareness, the second one is acceptance, and the third one is action. So let's go ahead and talk about these next. So step one is awareness, building awareness. And, to heal something in our life, we have to first recognize it, that it's there, right? We have to recognize that we're thinking these thoughts about ourselves or others, or we are taking these subconscious actions in our life that are maybe not very healthy or supportive of us. And we have to also be aware of the emotions that are taking place, right? Because ultimately, when change happens, we're feeling uncomfortable. And if we don't start to be aware of this discomfort, then we're not going to be able to make changes in our life. We're not going to be able to heal things, right? So I always like to think of awareness, we become the observer of what's going on as we're starting to respond to change. And think of it like, those nature shows, like think of ones narrated by David Attenborough, and, he's describing the cheetah as it's crouched amongst the grass, and, we can see that the muscles are tightening and it's retracting, and, it's scouting out its prey, and then it's going to pounce, Those are observations, and that's what we kind of want to do with ourselves, right? We want to journal, we want to write this down, because if we're already in our head about things, things can get jumbled up really easy. And it's always good to go back and look at this. We have everything out in front of us, and over time we can also track either similarities or differences as we move along our healing path. So write it down, and I usually like to split it into 3 categories. Mind, and this is what thoughts are we thinking, right? Simple as that. And I like to break that down between self and others, because if we're in a moment of change that involves other people as well, a lot of times we can be having certain thoughts about other people, they're lazy, or they don't care about me, or whatever. And then we have the thoughts of ourselves, right? I'm not good enough, why can't I get anything right, any of those things, and write them down. Then the next is our emotions. What feelings are coming up? Just write those down too. Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it stress? Is it sadness? And then our body. This is the third part, right? We want to observe what is going on in our body. Now, ultimately, when we have emotions arising, whether we recognize it or not in the moment, our body is having a response. And if we take a moment to tune in, we might recognize that when we start feeling scared, we feel our heart beating a little faster. We feel maybe our palms starting to get a little sweaty, or we feel a constriction in our chest, or like this sensation of a knot in our stomach. Anything that is going on in your body, write it down and just note it. So this begins the step of observing ourselves in that moment. Or I want to state this because I feel like it's important. A lot of times when we're in the heat of the moment, it's almost like a train, going at high speed, and we can't really slow it down very easily. We're in that reactive process, and we just don't have the awareness muscle built enough to be able to stop ourselves at that moment. And that's okay, because doing this activity is just as useful as doing it after the fact. We can reflect later that evening or even a few days later. Maybe it takes us a few days to realize, oops, I was caught in that reactive cycle. We don't want to add guilt and shame to the mix and be hard on ourselves because we're not, bringing this to our attention in the moment. As we begin to build our awareness over time, it becomes easier and we might catch ourselves sooner. And then eventually we might get to the point where, we start raising our voice and we realize, oh, I'm doing it again. And we can stop it a little bit sooner. We can recognize it a little bit sooner. And then eventually it might even get to the point where things that used to trigger you don't even trigger you at all. So be your own observer and write it down. That's step one. So step two is acceptance. So in order to heal something, not only do we have to be aware of it, but we also have to feel it, okay? We have to feel to heal. And acceptance is about giving ourselves and our body time and space to allow these feelings to come forward and emerge and be felt. And how this looks like for me is I actually mark my calendar and I set aside time for my healing. I set aside time where I'll have a quiet space to be alone and to invite these emotions to come forward and express however they need to express. And as I'm doing this, I'm saying to them, I give you permission to fill in the blank, whatever the feeling is that you're working with. And sometimes this can take a little bit of time, especially if this is new for us or we're not used to feeling our feelings, or, we have these sort of protective shells around us. It might take a few tries of doing this. So if nothing really comes forward the first time, don't give up, keep at it, and, keep trying. Because when you continue to show up for this part of you, then it'll start to break down that wall a little bit. And it'll start to feel safe to express itself. And another thing that you can say to it is, you're safe to fill in the blank. I'm here with you. Let this part of you know that you're here and you're holding space, and it doesn't need to, hold on to this anymore. As we start to feel these feelings coming up, we're going to give them permission to leave. We're going to give them permission to release. We don't need to hold on to the fear anymore. We don't need to hold on to the sadness anymore. We don't need to hold on to the anxiety anymore, right? Whatever it is. As this is sort of coming forward, as these feelings come up and they're releasing, this is where we're connecting with our intuition. We're gonna ask it, where does this painful part come from? Where does this emotion come from? What's the origin? What's the story behind it? And this is how we connect with our intuition and our inner wisdom. And often it'll share with us maybe a moment from our childhood, A lot of these, most of them, I would say, is a moment from our childhood. And, for example, let's say that as a child you were told that you're not good at anything, you know, and you lose your job. So, present day, you've lost your job. And these thoughts start coming up that you're not good enough. You start feeling shame and sadness and, unworthy. And that is the past reflecting into the present moment. You didn't lose your job because you're not good enough, right? There was just certain circumstances in your life. But because as a child you were told that, it's echoing into this present moment. And that's how you're seeing the situation. And as we keep on our healing path and, we do these, we connect in, our intuition will strengthen naturally over time, right? We're building this connection. We have to, this stuff that's wanting to clear out, it's interference, right? So as we're releasing interference, then our connection becomes a lot stronger and a lot clearer. Now, the next step on this, step 3, is action. So we've felt this healing shift, we've released this painful part. Now what do we do? Action refers to the activities or the actions that we take on our healing path to continue to support ourselves, to continue to nourish our spirit and show ourselves love and kindness and, whatever brings joy to our life. Step 1 and 2 are about sort of cleaning out the old energy. And when we heal, we transform, it brings in this light, this higher frequency, this light energy, which is aligned, it's our true self, right? And we want to nourish that because, these old patterns, even, as we're healing them, we still have these habits that have been built into our system a lot of times for many years, and they can still have little echoes in our day to day. We have these habits that we can fall back into. And the things that we do to help support and nourish us and provide that self-care, it'll help us integrate that, right? This is, with energy healing, shamanic healing, this is the phase after the healing where we call integration. So we're supporting and nourishing our light body so that eventually, the residue or the echoes of the past, they just kind of wash away, right? And this can look different for everybody. We all have different activities that resonate with us. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's nature, maybe it's, going for a walk, or maybe it's art or music, any of those things. What does this new part of you, this new light part of you, what's it asking for to help support it? Sometimes you can ask it that and see what it says. Maybe if you were told you're not good enough or you weren't good at anything as a child, maybe this new part of you has always wanted to learn how to dance, and that's what it wants, to feel nourished and supported as, it integrates into your body, into your spirit. So I want to end our time together with a poem that I wrote. But before I do that, I just want to say that, our healing journey, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? One step at a time, one healing moment at a time. And, over the course of our journey, these can create really big changes in our life, right? Really big shifts. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And we don't need to heal all of our wounds in one moment. Sometimes they present themselves, but then they don't get healed till later, and that's okay, right? I've found in my own journey that as I just go through the steps and I just tend to what's before me, that eventually the other ones will fall into place. And just trust that your intuition is going to guide you. If connecting with your intuition is new to you, or you're want a little bit more information about it, then feel free to check out my ebook, which is on my website. It's completely free to download. And I just give more information about that, more details about that. So in addition to creating videos, I do enjoy sharing through writing. And on my website, I have blog posts which detail my own healing path. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that and, the things I've been going through in my own life and how I've been going through them, you can feel free to check that out. I also put out a monthly newsletter that talks a little bit more about that as well. And if you find that you want more individual support on your healing path, I do offer one-to-one healing sessions, and you can find information about that on my website as well. So let's go ahead and close our time together. We are never broken. Our light may never dim. Your inner spirit awoken, calling from within. Through summer, spring, winter, fall, we feel the pull, we hear the call. Blessings for me, blessings for you. As we journey together, our hearts beat true. Back to the light we always knew. Healing for me, healing for thee. Embracing all the parts so that we may see, both in the light and in the dark. I'm wishing you courage and strength on your healing path. Thanks for joining me today. Bye, guys.